My name is Josephine, and I'm 35 years old. 6 months ago, I was just an ordinary office worker, living alone in a rundown apartment in Denver, driving an 11-year-old Corolla, and stretching every dollar after paying bills. My family never once considered me successful, but they were very good at one thing, calling me whenever they needed money, then going silent when I was the one in need. That evening, I sat in my small living room, the place where, for the very first time, I had invited my mother, father, brother, sister, uncle, aunt, and a few other relatives all together. They thought I had called them to apologize for those desperate days of unemployment. None of them knew I was keeping a secret that could change everything. I gently placed a folder on the table and looked each one of them straight in the eye. For the past 2 weeks, I've called each of you, asking for just a little help. And all I received was the bare truth about this family. Have you ever wondered who truly cares for you when you have nothing left to give? If you've ever felt abandoned by your own kin, share it in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you want to hear a story that might change the way you see the word family. And now, let me tell you how it all began, with a lottery ticket worth $72 million. I lived in a small apartment on the south side of Denver. Low ceilings, yellowed paint, windows that creaked whenever the winter wind blew through. The kitchen never had enough light, and the microwave had to be tapped 3 times before it would start. Yet it was the only place I felt at peace, because at the very least, it was mine. I worked as an administrative assistant at a mid-sized law firm. I wasn't a lawyer, nor did I have any prestigious degree to hold my head high during meetings. I handled the nameless tasks: scheduling, coffee runs, printing documents, cleaning up conference rooms after presentations. My colleagues often praised me as reliable and dedicated, then left me behind to tidy up while they headed home early. Every morning I arrived 15 minutes early, carefully wiped down the printer screen, and stacked my desk neatly. In the evenings, I walked past rows of houses glowing with warm yellow lights, glimpsing through the glass at families sharing dinner and laughter. My own dinner was usually hastily cooked pasta and a cold cup of tea on an old wooden table. My family never asked how I was living. They only called when they needed something done. My mother, Carol, had once been a strong woman after divorcing my father, but since marrying Richard, a wealthy real estate investor, she had changed. Richard was polite but cold. He never called me Carol's daughter, just her, when speaking of me. They lived in a suburban mansion with gates taller than a person and a security system stronger than most banks. Whenever I visited, my mother always greeted me with the same line: "Bring vegetarian food. Richard doesn't like the smell of onions in the kitchen." I once helped them repair their porch roof after a storm, giving them $3,000 up front, and it was never mentioned again. A month later, I saw photos of them vacationing in Street Bart's, eating lobster, drinking wine, captioned, "Well-earned reward after the stress of home repairs." My father, Douglas, was a retired physics teacher. Principled, living by timetables and formulas. After divorcing my mother, he remarried Veronica, a woman 3 years younger than me. Veronica loved designer shopping and filmed cooking videos for social media. My father often told me I should live with a plan like him, saying every failure comes from poor financial foresight. Yet, when he needed someone to pay the hospital bill after a skiing accident 2 years ago, he called me past midnight and ended the call with, "We'll just note it down, consider it. Your help this time." My younger brother, Brian, was different. He called me dear sister whenever he needed funds for his cafe, logistics startup, or secondhand shop on eBay. Anything could be pitched as $1 million opportunity from his mouth, but the ending was always the same: a sorry call and a promise to pay back once the first order comes in. I had transferred him nearly $6,000 over 3 years, and the only thing I ever got back was a text: "I need just a little more." Help me. This one last time. Melissa, my youngest sister, married a doctor and lived in a Greenwood Village mansion. 3 stories, 4 bathrooms, oak furniture imported from Italy, and a voice-controlled lighting system. She loved hosting elegant themed dinners for upper-class friends. I was invited once more to help set up the table because the catering team was late. After the party, Melissa pulled me into the kitchen and said, "Could you help me with a small amount? Adam doesn't want to pull money from stocks yet, and I need to pay up front for Emma's new bedroom decor." I handed her $2,000 on my credit card. Months later, when I reminded her, Melissa just smirked. "Are you serious? You're really bringing that up over such a tiny amount?" My Uncle Howard always appeared with a Rolex watch, a brand new Tesla, and business advice he called pure gold. At family gatherings, he often looked at me and announced for everyone to hear, "Our girl here is still working a 9 to 5. Surely she can afford a decent pair of shoes by now?" I smiled weakly. Everyone laughed loudly. And no one noticed that I smiled only because I was used to the sting. The only person in my family who never asked for money, never flaunted wealth, and never belittled me was my Aunt Janet. She lived alone in a ground-floor apartment near the city library, taught at an elementary school nearby, and kept a cat named Charlie. Whenever I visited, she brewed tea, offered a small cookie, and asked, "Are you tired? Has anyone upset you?" She never once borrowed money from me. But at Melissa's wedding, she slipped $100 bill into my hand and whispered, "I know you'll be the one handling everything. Keep this so you don't feel shortchanged." I laughed then, a genuine laugh, one of the rare moments at family events. I wasn't rich, but I tried to live decently. I helped whenever they asked, even if it meant paying utility bills in installments. But through all those years, not one of them ever asked, "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" And then, with a single smudged lottery ticket, everything changed. Not because of money, but because I could see everything clearly, without pretending anymore. My 35th birthday fell on a windy Friday, the sky gray like chipped silver paint coating the city's air. I still went to work as usual, carefully locked the office cabinet, and stacked documents neatly for the lawyers before leaving. No one at work remembered my birthday, and I didn't blame them. I rarely shared anything personal, least of all emotions. After work, I stopped at the gas station near home like every week. The cashier's booth had bulletproof glass smudged by countless fingerprints, and behind it was Joe, the 60-something owner who always wore the same old baseball cap. He smiled when he saw me walk in. "Hello, Josephine. Birthday, huh?" I blinked in surprise. "Yes. How did you know?" He pointed to the camera screen mounted above the counter. "I remember every year on this day you buy an extra ticket." I chuckled softly. "Well, the usual then, but today, add 2 more. A little birthday treat." Joe nodded, handed me 3 tickets, still warm from the machine. I slipped them into my wallet, tucked between my bus pass and an old receipt, then left. On the way home, I expected nothing. Lottery tickets were just a poor person's dream, a thing my mother always mocked as a tax for those who don't understand probability. That night, I ate canned spaghetti and watched a documentary rerun about a woman living alone in a wooden cabin in Alaska. Near 9 p.m. I remembered the tickets. I picked up my phone, opened the results page. My eyes barely adjusted to the light when I saw the first number, 05. I checked the first ticket, nothing. Then the second ticket, 05, 17, 23, 31, 42, 07. I froze. I read the announced numbers again. 05, 17, 23, 31, 42, 07. My phone slipped from my hand onto the tile floor. My heart pounded wildly like a broken drum. I picked it up, Checked 3 times. Every number matched perfectly. The apartment was silent. I didn't dare scream, didn't even dare breathe too hard. I just sat there, clutching my chest, overwhelmed by something nameless, a cocktail of shock, thrill, fear, and hollow emptiness. I turned on the TV, rewound the lottery drawing. One by one, the numbers appeared, each ball dropping in the exact order I held in my hand. "No way," I whispered. I opened my laptop, went to the Colorado Lottery website. Prize, $72 million. Only one winning ticket and it was mine. I couldn't sleep all night, not from excitement but from fear. In the dark, I scrolled through stories of past winners. One divorced in 3 months. Another was sued by his brother. A woman in another state was accused of fraud by her best friend of 10 years. One man lost everything within 5 years after trusting a financial advisor who was an old college buddy. Another had to live in hiding after his entire extended family moved in, demanding a share. I kept reading until morning and drew one conclusion. If I wanted peace, I had to keep everything secret. No one could know, not my mother, not my father, not my siblings, not my coworkers, not even Charlotte, my only best friend. I sat on the edge of my bed, the ticket pressed tight in my palm as if letting go would make it vanish. The next morning, I put on my old sweater, wrapped a scarf around my neck, carried my worn leather wallet, and stepped outside. I walked into the bank on the corner, borrowed a private meeting room, and called a law office I'd once processed admin files for 2 years earlier. They referred me to a financial expert named Michael Drayton. The meeting took place on the 16th floor of a glass tower downtown. I sat on a leather chair, face pale from sleeplessness. Michael walked in, a man in his 50s, neat and composed, half-rimmed glasses, shirt without a wrinkle. "I hear you need asset protection advice," he said, voice steady as a breath. I pulled the ticket from my wallet, laid it on the desk. He glanced at it, then looked up, calm but sharp. "You want to stay anonymous?" "I want everything wiped from public records. I want to live like nothing happened." He nodded. "Then we begin with an anonymous trust. I'll coordinate with tax offices and banks. But first, you must promise absolute silence until the system is set up." I nodded without hesitation. A few days later, I officially became the owner of $72 million, but no one knew, not even my family. After taxes, the money was transferred into a special account under the name Arlington Trust, completely separated from my real identity. I hired an investment advisor, an independent accountant, and started learning about asset allocation as if I were taking a secret survival course. Outside of work and meetings with lawyers, I lived the same as before. My apartment didn't change. I still drove the old Corolla. I still ate lunch with coworkers in the break room, paid my phone bill in installments, and quietly peeled promotional flyers off my mailbox. But inside me, a storm was rising with each passing day. I began to look at everything differently. My mother's casual remarks, Melissa's veiled comments, Brian's indifference, all of it became clearer than ever. It was like a fogged window had been wiped clean, showing me who my family really was and what I was in their eyes. And I began to wonder, if I stumbled, who among them would reach out a hand, not for gain, not for calculation? Who would truly see me as a human being, not as a walking wallet? I needed an answer. Not for revenge, but to prepare for what was ahead. And in my heart, a plan quietly began to take shape, step by step. I chose the name Arlington Trust for my fund, not for any special reason, but because it felt solid, discreet, and unconnected to anything personal. Mark Harrison, the financial attorney Michael had introduced me to, was the one who helped shape the entire legal structure around the money. He was the type who dressed neatly, polite without being flashy, and most importantly, knew when to remain silent. We need 3 layers of protection, Mark said, as I sat across from his glossy walnut desk. A blind trust, a secondary account under a designated proxy, and a limited liability company as an intermediary. None of it will carry your name directly. I sat in silence, taking notes carefully, my mind turning like gears. It was all unfamiliar, but I couldn't miss a single step. When everything is set up, he continued, you can move money into personal accounts without anyone tracing the source. You can also invest, buy property, even start a nonprofit if you wish, all carried out under legal entities with no one knowing you're behind it. I nodded. I don't plan to buy mansions or luxury cars. I just want to live in peace. Mark gave a faint smile. People who say that are usually the ones who need a lawyer the most. I still went to the small Denver law office every morning, made coffee, filed documents, drafted contracts on request. I didn't change my hairstyle, didn't buy new clothes, didn't order expensive meals at lunch. I still packed cookies in a paper bag for my manager when she forgot breakfast, still drove the Corolla that rattled at every turn. No one suspected a thing. Life went on as usual, the quiet rhythm of someone no one really noticed. But inside, that quietness was just a fragile cover for the constant thought pounding in my head. If everything were exposed, what would I still have left? I started avoiding family gatherings. Melissa invited me to Emma's birthday party. I excused myself with work. My mother asked me to dinner at her house. I said I had a cold. Brian called to borrow $300 because he needed it urgently for a shipment from Houston. I refused, hesitating. Sorry, I'm tight this month too. The guilt lingered, but the fear was stronger. I wasn't afraid they'd know I was wealthy. I was afraid of the look in their eyes once they did. Not family anymore, but a thick wallet left open. Some nights I woke in the middle of sleep, cold sweat soaking my neck, heart pounding from a dream too real. My mother crying, Melissa holding my hand, calling me the best sister, Brian kneeling to apologize, all sweet enough to make me dizzy. And then, in the dream, I'd hear the words, "How much do you need? I'll transfer it right now." And then they disappeared. None of them came back. I told Mark about this during a closed-door meeting at his office. I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing. I feel like I'm living 2 lives. One as the poor admin clerk, the other as someone who could buy this whole building if I wanted. He studied me for a moment, then said slowly, "You're not living 2 lives. You're protecting your real one." I sat still, letting that sink in. For a brief second, it felt like he had lifted an invisible weight off me. After that, I started making small changes. I bought a new laptop, something I had postponed for 3 years. I enrolled in an online class on nonprofit management under a false name. I opened a secondary bank account under Arlington Trust, with only a small balance, just to test transfers that left no trace. One day, I walked out of the local grocery store with a bag of vegetables and saw Aunt Janet waiting at the bus stop. She wore the same old wool coat I'd seen since high school, hair tied up neatly, holding a book in her hands. "Aunt Janet?" She looked up, squinting in the sunday. "Josephine, how are you?" I nodded, then offered to drive her home. In the car, she asked about me, talked about her students, the new class she was teaching, and about Charlie, her cat, who had just needed dental work. "You've been busy, haven't you? Haven't seen you at Carol's place lately." I smiled lightly. "Not exactly busy, just sometimes you need to step back a little and think." She didn't ask further. She just nodded, then turned to the window. After that, I visited her more often. I didn't say a word about the money, nothing about the lottery. I just listened and realized those conversations were the only thing that let me breathe between the 2 lives running side by side. The rest of my family stayed the same. Melissa posted photos from Hawaii with Adam, captioned, "Family is everything." Brian changed his profile picture to a selfie in front of a new phone store, writing, "Third startup. This one's a sure win." Carol texted to remind me to return the old heater receipt she once sent me, even though it was a Christmas gift 2 years ago. I read it all, then shut off my screen. One question spun endlessly in my head. If I collapsed, with nothing left in my hands, who among them would stay with no reason other than love? So I began drafting a plan. Not to punish, but to find out if those relationships truly existed or were just a thin shell propped up by habit and blood ties. I needed proof, and I had found a way to get it without ever revealing the truth. A small play, a simple test. I would pretend to lose everything and quietly watch. I began writing the script on a quiet evening, when the city outside had already sunk into darkness. The wall clock ticked steadily, and I sat at the kitchen table, a cold cup of tea beside me, gripping an old ballpoint pen. I needed a story real enough that no one would doubt it, but not too dramatic that they'd feel forced into a corner. I wrote line by line, erased, rewrote, weighing every detail like someone preparing to testify in court. The story was set like this. The law firm where I worked had just lost a major contract and was forced to lay off staff suddenly. I was among the first to be let go. Around the same time, I discovered a small tumor that required early surgery. With medical bills and rent piling up, I was in crisis. I had applied to many jobs but hadn't heard back. I needed to borrow $7,000 to get through the next 2 months, promising to pay it back as soon as I found new work. I practiced how I'd say it. My voice needed to tremble just enough, but not too much. My words had to be sincere, but not desperate. I didn't want anyone to feel pressured. I just needed to know if, in their eyes, I was still worth caring about. I wrote each family member's name in a notebook, planning to approach each one separately with the same story. I would call or meet face to face, never text, never email. Every reaction would be recorded carefully. I began with my mother. I chose an afternoon, calling her when I knew Richard was out golfing. Her voice was as usual, light but with a hint of caution, like she had something more important to do. "Why are you calling at this hour?" "Mom, I need to talk. About my job." "What is it? They let you go already?" I was caught off guard. "How did you guess that?" "Well, anyone can see the Merardis. Economy is sliding. A tiny law firm like yours can't hold out forever." I bit my lip, swallowing what I had prepared. "Yes. I was just laid off." Sudden downsizing. Silence for a few seconds. "So, have you applied elsewhere yet?" "Yes. But no callbacks yet." "Mom, actually, I also have a health issue. The doctor says I need minor surgery. Not dangerous, but it needs to be done soon. My insurance ended with the job. Now I'm really stuck. With rent and medical bills, I need about $7,000 to get through. I promise I'll pay back." "Josephine," she cut me off. "You know, Richard and I just put a deposit on that Aspen cabin. Money's tied up in the contract. I don't have anything spare." "I understand, it's just, if you could help with even part of it. Why don't you ask your father? He still gets his pension. And Melissa, her husband's a doctor. Paul could probably help." I went silent. I didn't say another word. She didn't ask how I felt. The call ended with a light remark. "Don't let yourself get down. You're not getting any younger." I set the phone down, exhaled deeply. I pulled out my notebook and wrote simply, "Mother refused." Shifted responsibility to others. No concern for health. No offer to help even partially. The next one was my father. I arranged to meet him at a small cafe near his house. I arrived early, waiting in a space that carried memories of our rare meetings after he remarried. When he walked in, shirt neatly tucked, canvas tote of books in hand, I stood to greet him. "How have you been?" he asked, sitting down on the wooden chair. I have something to tell you, Dad. I explained the whole prepared script, slowly and clearly. He listened, occasionally frowning, but didn't interrupt. When I finished, he crossed his arms, thoughtful eyes fixed on me. Josephine, I've told you before. You always need a 6-month emergency fund. Ending up in this situation is a lesson. I had some savings, but most of it went to tests and prescriptions. I'm doing my best, he sighed. I'm not saying you're lazy, but Veronica and I are looking at buying a new condo, moving to a quieter area. Transferring money now would affect our budget. I just need a loan. I promise I'll repay. He shook his head lightly. I don't doubt that, but you need to learn how to push through crises. The older you get, the more independence you need. I pressed my lips together and said nothing more. He glanced at his watch, then stood up. I have to go. Veronica's waiting for dinner. I nodded. On the way home, I opened my notebook and quietly wrote, Father refused, no offer to help, emphasized the lesson, mentioned his own plans. Never asked how I was living. I returned home, unlocked the door, set my bag on the chair, then leaned against the wall. It felt like walking through a layer of cold fog, no path ahead, no place to hold on. The first two people I had turned to, the ones who gave me life and raised me, had chosen to turn away. And I still had 8 names left on the list. I didn't know what awaited me, but I was ready to write it all down. Not to judge, but to finally see clearly what I once believed blood ties meant. The third person I decided to approach was Veronica, my father's new wife. I didn't call ahead. I simply showed up on Tuesday afternoon when I knew my father would be teaching a tutoring session and Veronica would likely be home preparing content for her cooking videos. The house was still in that quiet neighborhood, white-painted wooden gates, a front yard lined with stones and symmetrical lavender bushes I had never felt comfortable walking past. I knocked. After a moment, Veronica cracked the door open. Josephine? Hi. Can I come in to talk for a bit? She wore a cream blouse, still holding a wooden spoon dusted with batter. Sure. But I'm about to record a video. Make it quick, okay? I sat on a bar stool at the kitchen counter. The space gleamed like something out of a home decor magazine. I'm running into some trouble with money. Yeah? I just lost my job contract, plus some unexpected medical expenses. I'm really struggling. Veronica set the spoon down, folded her arms. Is that so? That's surprising. But what does that have to do with me? I just need some temporary help. A few thousand to get by. I'll pay you back once I find work. She looked at me for a moment, then smiled faintly. Josephine, I'm not the one who handles money in this house. And even if I were, do you think we're a bank? At your age, and you still don't have an emergency fund? I inhaled deeply. I've tried, but a few medical bills weren't covered by insurance. Well, then maybe you should consider part-time housekeeping. I can pay by the hour. Cleaning, washing dishes, tending the plants. At least that's honest work. I stood. Thank you. Veronica shrugged. Don't take it the wrong way. But everyone has their own problems, Josephine. No one owes you anything. I walked to the door, feeling hollow inside. Back home, I wrote in my notebook. Veronica refused, mocked, suggested chores for pay. No concern for reasons or health condition. The next evening, I called Brian. My brother answered after several rings, his voice upbeat and quick as always whenever he needed money. Hey sis, how've you been? I told him the whole story, just as I had with the others. Really? Oh man, that's rough, Brian murmured, sounding sympathetic. How much do you need? 7,000. I don't need it all at once. But if you could lend me some now, Brian sighed. I'm strapped too, just invested in a shipment of phone accessories from China. But let me see what I can do. I'll send you 200 for now, okay? I know it's tough for you too. Thank you. Don't mention it. That's what family's for. For a moment, I felt a small warmth. 2 days later, my account showed exactly $200 deposited. But the next morning, Brian texted, "Hey sis, can you spot me 300 real quick? I'll pay it back this weekend." Shipping company added a surprise fee. I hesitated, then transferred the money. After that, silence. Brian never followed up. I called 3 times. He was always busy. My messages went unread. I opened my notebook again and wrote, "Brian sent a little to look good, then borrowed more and vanished. Never checked in afterward." I arranged to meet Melissa at a cafe near her house. She brought her 2 kids, sat them down with iPads, then turned to me with a lightly made-up face and a hint of jasmine perfume. "Oh my God, why didn't you say something sooner?" she whispered, eyes full of worry. I told her my story, keeping calm. Melissa held my hand across the table. "I can't believe this is happening to you. You've always been the hardest working in the family." Tears nearly pricked my eyes. "Can you help in any way? You need about 7,000, just temporarily." Her hand slipped away gently. 7,000. "I'll pay it back. We can break it up in parts. If Adam finds out I transferred that much without asking, he'll be furious. We just paid tuition for the kids next year, and we're planning a kitchen remodel too. I understand. Even a portion would help." She pressed her lips together. "I'll talk to Adam. I'll try." 2 days later, I received a message from an unknown number. "Josephine just wants to lean on us. Don't get involved. Everyone has problems." I didn't need long to realize it was Adam. The message was later deleted. Melissa never reached out again. I wrote in my notebook, "Melissa sympathetic at first, but no action." Adam outright refused, warned his wife not to help. I never expected anything from Richard, but I still called. He answered in his clipped voice, "Josephine, what is it?" I briefly explained about losing my job, needing temporary support. "I'm not your father. Don't call the wrong number." The call ended in 7 seconds. I wrote in my notebook, hand steady, "Richard denied responsibility, flat refusal. No questions." I saw Uncle Howard at a distant relative's birthday party. He wore a silver-gray suit, a red pocket square, and that ever-present grin that made every word he spoke sound like fact. When I walked closer, he asked, "Heard you lost your job?" Such a shame. But probably a good lesson, right? I didn't reply. I just nodded and retreated to the corner. 3 days later, Melissa told me he had repeated my story at another gathering, describing me as a classic case of someone who can't manage money but expects everyone else to bail her out. I only smiled, then opened my notebook. Howard mocked, spread the story, used private matters as gossip. 7 people. 7 different reactions, but with one thing in common. Not a single one chose to stand with me. I closed the notebook, laid it on the chipped wooden table, and sat still for a long time. Not out of sorrow, but because, for the first time, I felt utterly clear-headed. I had nearly finished the list. 7 people. 7 cold, cautious, even cruel responses. I sat for hours in the silent kitchen, the afternoon sun slipping through the small window, casting thin, hair-like streaks of light across the table. I didn't call Aunt Janet, she wasn't on the list, because I never considered testing someone who had lived her whole life for others, never once asking anything in return. She had never borrowed money, never hinted at favors owed. I couldn't bear to wound her with a staged story. But that morning, as I was rearranging my notebook, the phone rang. "Josephine? It's me, Janet." Her voice was steady and gentle, as always. "I heard something about you having trouble at work. Carol said you left your job, is that true?" I froze, gripping the phone tighter. "Where did you hear that?" "Melissa mentioned it at Susan's birthday gathering last week. People were talking, but no one really asked how you were." I gave a faint laugh. I'm fine, Aunt, just a little difficulty. Are you home? I'll come by. I have something to give you. I was about to decline, but her next words caught in my throat. You don't have to pretend to be strong for me. Just open the door. She arrived about an hour later. Still the same slim figure, old gray wool coat, hair pinned up neatly, face marked with quiet worry but not panic. I opened the door, and the faint scent of her peppermint tea lingered on her collar. Charlie, her old cat, wasn't with her. She hugged me lightly, as if afraid I might break into pieces. I heard you're having a hard time. You don't need to explain if you don't want to, but I can't sit easy. I pulled her inside, made tea, and sat across from her in the soft afternoon light. She didn't press me. She simply looked around my sparse kitchen, the fridge door bare except for a note reminding me to pay the power bill, the chair with a small crack in the armrest. After a few minutes of silence, she opened her bag and took out a thick envelope. Here, take this. There's 2,500 inside. My eyes widened, and I shook my head instantly. Aunt, I can't. You don't have that kind of money. This is my savings, she said, voice firm yet gentle. I was going to use it to fix the bathroom. That faucet keeps dripping. But you're more important than a faucet. No, I can't take it. You need it more. She placed the envelope on the table, then looked straight at me. Josephine, I don't know exactly what you're going through. But what saddens me most is that you didn't come to me. You thought I couldn't help. And that hurts me more than any financial struggle ever could. My nose burned with tears. I didn't want to bother you. You've had enough hardships already. I didn't spend my whole life working hard just to watch someone I love suffer in silence. She paused, then spoke again, softer this time. If you want to save money, move in with me. My living room has a pull-out sofa. Not fancy, but quiet. Charlie would be happy to have someone to talk to. I couldn't say a word. I only bowed my head as tears fell onto my hands without warning. She reached for a tissue on the table and handed it to me. You don't have to be strong alone. Not with me. I nodded, unable to make a sound, my chest heavy yet strangely lighter. We sat in silence for a while. The tea cooled. She shared a few small stories from school, mischievous new students, and how Charlie had been scolded by the vet for gaining weight. She stood before the sky grew dark. Just before leaving, she turned back and patted my shoulder. You'll get through this, not because you must, but because you can. And you're not alone. I stood at the door, watching her small frame disappear behind the line of trees along the street. I had never seen anyone so steadfast and kind. In a family full of excuses, hidden agendas, and lies, Aunt Janet shone like a small oil lamp in a dark room, not blinding, but just enough to reveal where the truth of the heart lay. I opened my notebook, flipped to a new page, and wrote slowly. Janet came on her own. Brought 2,500 from her personal savings. No demands, no hesitation. Offered me a place to stay to cut costs, genuine care. Never asked if I could pay it back. I put down the pen, my hand still trembling. Not from exhaustion, but from emotion. A woman who lived modestly, a teacher's salary, never enough for extras, was the only one who stepped toward me when everyone else turned away. Not because I promised repayment, not because of my place in the family, simply because I was Josephine, and for her, that was reason enough to care. That night, after Aunt Janet left, I sat alone on the sofa, still holding the envelope with $2,500. In my mind swirled a chaos of faces, words, and glances I had carefully recorded line by line in my notebook. And now, the portrait of my family stood painfully clear. I picked up my phone and typed a message to her. Aunt Janet, tomorrow I'll come by with that apple pie you like. In less than a minute, she replied, I'll brew peppermint tea. Don't forget to hug Charlie. The next morning I arrived early. She opened the door, delighted surprise in her eyes when she saw me carrying the pie and a bouquet of white daisies. I didn't say much. We sat at her small kitchen table, eating pie and chatting about unimportant things, her new neighbor, the children's reading program she had just joined, the old novels I used to borrow from her bookshelf. By the second cup of tea, I set my glass down, hands tightening together. Aunt, she looked up, her face as gentle as always when I needed to say something important. What is it, dear? I took a deep breath. I lied. She didn't react, only tilted her head and waited. I'm not unemployed, and I don't need to borrow money. Everything was just a test. She stayed quiet for a long moment. I stared down at the wooden table, afraid to look up and see disappointment in her eyes. A test of what? I won the lottery. $72 million. A little over a month ago. The air froze for a few seconds. I still kept my eyes fixed on the tabletop, terrified of what I might see if I looked up. She exhaled slowly. Not a sigh of anger, but like releasing a heavy weight from her chest. And you wanted to see who would help when you had nothing. I nodded, my voice breaking. I was afraid if they knew I had money, everything would change. I was afraid they wouldn't be themselves anymore. And I couldn't bear that. She laid her hand over mine, warm and steady. Josephine, you weren't wrong to be cautious. Money doesn't change people. It only reveals them. You've simply uncovered what was already there. I looked at her, tears spilling before I realized. I never thought you'd be the only one. She smiled softly. I'm not the only one. I'm just the only one who never expected anything in return. And maybe that's why you felt safe enough to tell me the truth. I pulled a folder from my bag and placed it in front of her. I want you to see this. She opened it and read the first lines. Proposal for a personal retirement fund and lifetime health insurance. Primary beneficiary, Janet E. Monroe. Her brow furrowed. What is this? I looked straight into her eyes, my voice firm. You don't need to tutor on weekends anymore. You don't need to worry about Charlie's vet bills or bake cookies to raise money for the library. You've done enough. It's my turn to do something for you. She fell silent, her eyes glistening. Josephine, you don't have to. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're just good at hiding it. And I can't go on living with everything while the only person who loved me unconditionally still has to count every dollar. I pulled another document from my bag, a draft contract for the purchase of a small suburban house, 10 minutes drive from mine. A single-story home with a backyard, large windows, and a wood-paneled reading room. This house is yours. I've already put down the deposit. The title will be held under the charitable trust I set up, but you'll have the right to live there for life. She trembled, her hand pressed to her chest, overwhelmed. Are you sure? Have you thought this through? I don't want to be a burden. I held her hand tightly. No one is a burden when they were the only one to reach out when everyone else turned away. She smiled, then broke into tears. We sat there, hand in her small kitchen, with sunlight filtering through the curtains. I had never felt peace like that. Not because of the number in my bank account, but because I had found the one place in this world where love came without conditions. And I understood that every plan from here on would begin at this table, the place where I had rediscovered the true worth of a person in my life. It took me 3 days to arrange everything for the meeting. Not because I needed time to prepare the space, but because I needed to calm myself, bit by bit. I polished the wooden floor in my small apartment, borrowed extra folding chairs from Aunt Janet, brewed a pot of chamomile tea, and set plates of cookies on the table. The only things I thought might soften the tension, once everyone started eyeing each other with suspicion. I sent messages to every family member, without giving details. I only wrote that I had something important to announce. My mother replied curtly, Fine. But don't take too long, I have another appointment. Melissa sent back a sad face emoji. Brian typed just 2 words, be there. Uncle Howard didn't respond, but I knew he'd come. He never missed a chance to be the center of attention. My father called instead of texting, asking just one question. Is this about the money you asked to borrow? I answered, no, but it's about something more important. On Sunday afternoon, I stood in my apartment, waiting as each person walked through the door. Carol and Richard arrived first, as usual. My mother wore a bright red coat, sat down, and quietly observed, her eyes betraying curiosity. Melissa came with Adam and the 2 kids, but left them in the car because this won't take long. Brian showed up next, the smell of cologne heavy, carrying a paper bag with 2 cans of soda and a forced smile. Uncle Howard and my father came last, each bringing a folding chair, settling side by side as if ready for a lecture. Veronica didn't come. She'd sent word through my father that she was filming a diet vlog and couldn't be absent. When everyone was seated, I stood in the middle of the small room. My hands steady, though my heart felt weighed down with stone. Thank you all for coming. I asked you here because there are some things that need to be said clearly. No one spoke. My mother glanced at her phone. Melissa tugged at her sleeve. Adam checked his watch. I've found a new job. Better pay, better environment. More accurately, I'm starting my own project. I don't need money anymore. A flicker of relief crossed a few faces. My mother exhaled, nodding slightly as if confirming her suspicions. Well, that's good, she said. I knew you'd manage somehow. No, I cut in. It's not good, and the reason I called this meeting isn't to share good news, but to talk about what happened before. I looked at each one of them. When I pretended to be unemployed and in need, I turned to every person in this room. The room went still. Brian raised his eyebrows slightly. Melissa turned her face away. I don't blame anyone for not being able to help. I just can't forget the way you all chose to refuse. I turned to my mother. Mom, I remember every word you said. Ask your father. Ask Melissa. You never asked if I was okay, if I was in pain. You only looked for a way to pass the responsibility. She tightened her grip on her purse strap, her voice dropping. I was busy then, dealing with the property issues with Richard. I don't need an explanation, I replied softly. I'm only repeating exactly what happened. I turned to my father. You spent 20 minutes lecturing me about saving, and ended with the words, learn to take care of yourself. I haven't forgotten. He sat still, his face hardening, refusing to meet my eyes. Brian. My younger brother flushed, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. You sent me 200, then immediately texted to borrow 300. And after that, you disappeared. Come on, sis. I was juggling money for my project, Brian tried to explain. I didn't abandon you. I didn't respond. I turned to Melissa. You cried when you heard I lost my job. But when I said I needed help, you mentioned tuition fees and the kitchen remodel. Then your husband sent me a message saying I just wanted to mooch. Adam shook his head, irritation in his tone. You shouldn't have read a private message. You sent it directly to me. Then you recalled it. I still read it. No one spoke further. I shifted my gaze to Uncle Howard. You turned my story into a joke at a family gathering. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, but only because I had nothing left to lose. He shrugged, speaking as casually as if reporting the weather. You weren't the first person to lose a job. I only repeated what Melissa told me. I nodded. That's right. You all spoke your truth. But not one of you stopped to ask if I was okay. My eyes swept around the room. Silence. No one dared look at me directly. The only person who gave me money was the one I never even called Aunt Janet. She lives on a teacher's salary, cares for an old sick cat, and has never borrowed a dime from anyone. But she came to see me, brought 2,500 and invited me to move in with her. I paused, letting the words sink into the air. Family is not the ones who wait until you have money. Family is the ones who come when all you have left is yourself. Brian jumped up, fumbling with his keys. Sorry, I have an appointment with a supplier. Melissa wiped her eyes, nodded toward me but said nothing. My mother stared at me, lips pressed tight as if forcing herself not to react. My father bent down to grab his coat, while Uncle Howard walked out already on his phone. I stood in the middle of the room, silently watching them leave. No one hugged me. No one looked back. Only Aunt Janet, standing at the far end of the row, stepped forward and held my hand tightly. She didn't need to say a word. Because everything that needed to be understood, the two of us already knew too well. I left that family meeting with a strange lightness. Not because things were resolved, but because I no longer felt the need to cling to something that never really existed. Aunt Janet and I walked home hand in hand, the twilight sky turning purple. The autumn breeze brushed my cheeks like a quiet reassurance, telling me it was time to live in a way that wasn't about pleasing anyone else anymore. I began to act. No sports cars, no mansions on the hill, no world tours. Instead, I reached out to a small organization that supported single mothers, one I had read about in a short article. They worked quietly, with almost no major funding, relying only on goodwill and human effort. I called the executive director Lynn, a woman in her 60s with a raspy yet steady voice. "We don't have much of a budget," she said hesitantly. "If you want to donate some groceries or used items, we'd already be grateful." I quietly transferred $300,000 to the organization's account with only one condition: my name would never be made public. Lynn called back just minutes later, her voice breaking. "Who are you? How can we ever thank you enough?" "There's no need for thanks," I replied. "Just keep doing what you're doing. Help those who have nowhere else to turn." After that, I started a foundation of my own, a small nonprofit, no fanfare, named The Light. That still shines. The assets were held under a trust. No one knew I was behind it. The team was just 7 people, all of whom had once lost something, been rejected, or hurt by their own families. We chose to help single mothers cast out from their homes, elderly with no children to care for them, and those living in the city whom no one even remembered by name. I no longer pretended to be poor, but I didn't flaunt wealth either. I still drove the same old 4-door car, still shopped at the discount aisle, still wore the coat from 3 winters ago. The only difference was in my eyes calm now, no longer searching for recognition from people who never once looked up for me. About 2 months after that family meeting, I heard my father had a stroke. The call came from a hospital nurse. He had listed outdated insurance information, and his financial records were no longer valid. The hospital was preparing to move him to minimal care due to lack of funds. I went there the next morning, stood outside the emergency room window, and looked in. He lay motionless, his face stripped of the sternness I remembered, leaving only weariness and loneliness. I didn't walk in, I didn't speak. I only called my lawyer's office, instructing them to pay all hospital costs within a week through an anonymous patient aid fund. I left no name. No thank you came. No apology followed. But I wasn't expecting any. The next week, I heard my cousin Brian was drowning in gambling debt, at risk of being evicted from his apartment if he didn't settle a loan of more than $12,000. The family gossiped, some scolded, others shook their heads, but no one stepped forward to help. I contacted the lender, paid off the debt entirely under the name, an old friend. I left one message: use this chance to start over, or there won't be another. Brian never knew it was me. He posted a public thank you to a mysterious benefactor on Facebook, and some relatives reacted with, haha, convinced he had made it up. I simply scrolled past and turned off my phone. The apartment Aunt Janet and I shared began to feel cramped, especially after she adopted two stray cats and grew a herb garden on the balcony. I decided to buy a small house near a park, not luxurious but spacious, full of light, with a dedicated reading room just for her. I transferred ownership to her name, calling it a thank you gift. She cried, pushing the papers back, saying she couldn't accept. I only held her hand and whispered, "You were the only one who taught me kindness without ever needing to lecture me. I'm only giving back what I learned." We moved in close to each other, sharing morning tea, going to the farmer's market on weekends, and trading stories about others, not to gossip, but to find ways to help. Meanwhile, the relatives began to speculate. Some said I'd won a small lottery. Others claimed I was seeing a wealthy man, and a few suggested I was in something shady. Their words traveled from wedding banquets to Veronica's salon, to Melissa, and even to old school friends. No one knew that my change hadn't come from luck, but from the moment I stopped searching for my worth in the eyes of those who never cared. They only saw me living better. They didn't see the nights I cried when the truth came clear. They saw me helping people. They didn't see how I once begged in silence. And strangely enough, I no longer needed them to. 1 year passed since the day I tested the loyalty of those I once called family, and the light that still shines had grown beyond anything I imagined. Women who once slept in cars, elderly who lived unnoticed on society's margins, children following their mothers into shelters, they were no longer just numbers in a report or fleeting images on the local news. I had touched their hands, heard the tremble in their voices when they called me Miss Josephine, though many still believed I was just another longtime volunteer. That was enough. I didn't need them to know who paid for that single mother's hospital bill, or who bought the old car that let her take her child to school each day. We leased a vacant lot on the north side of the city. Over 8 months, it became the Hope Haven Community Center with an open kitchen, reading room, free healthcare clinic, and job training area for women rebuilding their lives. Every brick was laid by people once left behind. They didn't need pity. They just needed a chance, and someone to believe they deserved it. The opening ceremony was held on a mild September afternoon. The breeze carried the scent of cookies from the open kitchen out into the courtyard, where children ran, elderly women read under trees, and a small choir sang old songs that left the audience lost in memory. I stood behind the stage, fingers curled around the badge with my name. On the simple stage stood a sign, "The light that still shines, where every person has value." Looking to the second row, I saw Aunt Janet wrapped in the wool scarf I had knit her last winter. She smiled, said nothing, just nodded gently when our eyes met. That nod was a blessing, a permission, a trust without words. The host invited me up. I walked on stage, my low heels tapping the wooden steps. The microphone felt cool in my hand. I lifted my gaze to the crowd of hundreds, not waiting for money, not waiting for miracles, but for something true. I drew a deep breath. "Good afternoon, everyone," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm not someone good at public speaking. I used to think a person's worth came from their degrees, their salary, or the house they lived in, but I was wrong." A few murmurs rippled through the audience. I continued. 1 year ago, I lost all faith in the people I once called family. I called each of them, asking to borrow some money. It was only a story I made up. But the answers they gave me were the truest things of all. No one spoke. Only the wind moved through the trees behind the stage. I learned that family is not blood. Family is the one who will split their bread with you when you're hungry. The one who doesn't ask what mistake you made, but only asks, "Are you okay?" My Aunt Janet is that person. She isn't wealthy. She isn't famous. But she did what no one else could. She reached out her hand before I even called. I looked toward Aunt Janet. She sat still, her eyes red, her hand gripping her purse strap tightly. Someone once asked me, What is the most precious thing I've gained this past year? I thought about it for a long time, and the answer is this. I paused for a moment, letting my eyes sweep across the courtyard. The true treasure isn't money. It's knowing who deserves to stay in your life. Applause rose from the left corner of the stands. Then a few more joined. Soon, the entire place was clapping. I bowed my head not to hide my emotions, but as a way to say thank you. Down below, a few members of my old family were there too. They had come out of curiosity, though they hadn't been invited. Brian stood at the back, his hands shoved in his pockets, his eyes avoiding mine. Melissa arrived with her husband, her face carefully made up, but missing any real glow. My mother, Carol, sat at the far end, her expression cold but betraying a flicker of unease. They had all heard the rumors, but none of them knew the full story. And I no longer needed them to. I stepped off the stage, weaving through handshakes, hugs, and congratulations from both friends and strangers. A little girl with curly hair tugged at my hand, her voice chirping, "Are you the lady who built the house with the swing?" I bent down, brushing her cheek gently. "I only helped find the right people to build it. But the swing, that's all for you." The ceremony ended with a rendition of "Lean on Me," sung by a group of women who had once lived in shelters. Their voices weren't perfect, but I had never heard a version more powerful. I turned back toward the community center, at the red brick walls, at the American flag waving proudly above the yard, at the stream of people leaving in peace. And I understood it was betrayal that gave me freedom, and it was kindness that gave me a true family. Not everyone is born into a real home, but if you're brave enough to let go of the illusions, you can build a place where your heart belongs. For me, that place was no longer just a memory, it was the present, glowing brightly. If you're still listening now, maybe something personal is stirring inside you. Maybe it's empathy. Maybe it's anger on my behalf. Or maybe it's just a quiet question. If it were me, who would reach out their hand? I don't tell this story to accuse or to complain. I tell it because I believe that in every life, there comes a moment when we face choices that aren't easy, and it's in those moments that we finally see what's real family and what's only a facade. Money can dazzle the eyes, but sincerity doesn't need a spotlight to shine. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If my story reminds you of someone in your family, whether it's the person who hurt you or the one who always stood silently by your side, share it in the comments below. Who knows? Maybe you're the gentle light someone else has been waiting for. And if you value true stories, ones that are raw, profound, and reach into the hidden corners of family life, hit follow on this channel. Each week, I'll share journeys of the human heart, with pain, betrayal, but also renewal and hope. Because sometimes a single story is enough to help someone find their faith again. I'll see you next time. My name is Josephine, and I believe that every family, even the ones that seem broken, deserves a chance to begin again, with truth and with love.